Transformed from a small island in the Atlantic to arguably the most important city in the world, it is a testament to a long history of conflict and compromise in its most fundamental form. With the constant lurches of subways, honking of taxis, and screeching of brakes, the city provides a center of perpetual motion from night to day. Manhattan, a historical experiment that created the ultimate metropolis.
In 1625, the Dutch founded New Amsterdam on the island of Manhattan, a part of what is now New York State. Thanks to the Dutch's monetary motivation, Manhattan quickly distinguished itself as one of the world's greatest trading centers. The city's immediate success can be attributed to the fact that neither race nor religion interrupted their fiscal needs.
Their financial expertise is reflected in the fact that they bought the entire island of Manhattan for just over $24 and a few shiny beads. The Dutch occupation of New Amsterdam was put to an end in 1664, when the Duke of York captured it under the charter granted by King Charles II of England. Not a single shot was fired. This battle was constituted under the Treaty of Westminster.
During the Revolutionary War, several important battles were fought in and around New York City. Among these is the Battle of Bennett Park. A myriad of British and Hessian soldiers, numbering around 8,000, were ordered by General Howe to attack Fort Washington. They quickly routed the American forces on November 16, 1776, capturing 2,818 and a stockpile of American goods.
For the bulk of the Revolutionary War, Manhattan was under British dominion, but in 1783 Manhattan became a part of the new, independent America. New York played a very important part in the founding of our fledgling nation. Therefore, it seemed only fitting that it would become the United States' first capital. Manhattan's own City Hall served as the stage for George Washington's first inauguration to the presidency. However, this location would be short-lived. In 1791, the capital was moved to Philadelphia for 10 years, and eventually to Washington, D.C., as a compromise for the adoption of one of Alexander Hamilton's financial plans.
The 1700s also saw the birth of a society that would soon become New York City's most infamous political machine. Tammany Hall was a Democratic Party society that, for the most part, controlled New York City politics from the late 18th century well into the 20th. During the early 1800s, Tammany Hall helped secure its political control by earning the loyalty of the city's growing immigrant population. Many new arrivals found in Tammany Hall the security and support they needed after finding themselves in a strange new nation. In gratitude to the seemingly benevolent society, the immigrants willingly voted for whichever political candidate the hall cranked out, overlooking questionable election procedures and other fraudulent practices. Thomas Nast, an editorial cartoonist, liked to antagonize Tammany in his scathing cartoons, portraying the hall as a tiger killing democracy. The idea caught on, and the society became known as the Tammany Tiger.
One man, who was a frequent object of satire in these cartoons, worked his way to the top to become Tammany Hall's most notorious boss ever. William M. Boss Tweed used the Tammany Hall machine to seat himself comfortably in the United States House of Representatives and the New York Senate. He then used his power to plunder from the city enormous amounts of money. The actual amount is unknown, but over 2 years and 8 months, Tweed managed to swindle $75 million to $200 million, a gargantuan sum in 1870. He was arrested on embezzlement charges a year later and was held on an $8 million bail. Tammany Hall managed to keep a strong hold until the elections of the reform-minded Franklin D. Roosevelt and Fiorello LaGuardia proved to be too much for the once fearsome tiger.
Yes, we'll not only clean the streets of this city, but I'm going to clean every department of every grafting Tammany politician and appoint honest men and women in their places.
The once infallible society began to crumble and eventually collapsed.
Just as Tammany Hall and its crooked boss symbolized the vices of the city, corruption and greed, one monument would soon rise that would embody its virtues: freedom and the promise of a better life. In 1876, France decided to commission a sculpture to honor our friendship during the American Revolution. Unfortunately, standing in the way of this great gift was the issue of funding. America was to provide the pedestal in exchange for France building the statue. Financial problems arose on both sides of the Atlantic, but the needed money was eventually raised, and on October 26, 1886, France dedicated to us the Statue of Liberty, a centennial gift a decade late.
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Emma Lazarus, 1883.
The famous sonnet, The New Colossus, etched on the base of the Statue of Liberty, captures the struggle and spirit of immigrants who made the trying journey to America. For many weary travelers, the first views of the haunting Lady Liberty was an image they recalled for the rest of their lives, a symbol of hope in a torch and freedom in the shackles she trods upon.
People numbering more than 12 million from a plethora of nations passed through the gates of Ellis Island between 1892 and 1954. Foreigners were herded off ships into the crowded main buildings where they waited for hours on end to be examined for health defects that doctors believed could be contagious, including conjunctivitis, lameness, hernias, heart conditions, and mental defects. If found, they were marked with chalk and sent into an area where many were deported back to their homelands. People were also given a famous 29-question interrogation regarding legal status, completing the process of becoming an American.
The new families were surrounded in a bittersweet moment, rejoicing over the ones they joined and mourning the ones they were forced to leave behind. The influx of inhabitants onto the bustling streets of Manhattan helped the city not to be only a leader in importing goods, but in the ever-growing commodity of people. Unfortunately, this flood of immigration created problems in Manhattan. Decades before the Great Influx, in 1835, New York had already surpassed Philadelphia as the most populous city in America. Now, in the latter part of the 1850s, the flood of immigration caused the city to swell tremendously. Overcrowding caused violence to break out between the many different ethnic groups that inhabited the city. The result of this violence was the rise of gangs, many of which were composed of adolescents. And in the slums of New York, things would only get worse.
Around 1927, America entered a period of economic stagnation, and wages didn't keep up with increasing inflation. This came to a boil in October of 1929 when the stock market crashed, plunging America into the Great Depression. The problem was then exaggerated by incompetent government policy, perpetrated mainly by President Hoover. But what caused this catastrophe? There is no one answer. Some attribute it to the mountain of debt the country had accrued, due to most businesses' reliance on cheap credit. This strategy was beneficial in the short term, but created lots and lots of commercial debt. Many simply felt that a time like this was necessary for any country. They said the country had to go through a period of liquidation before it could continue growing. Whatever the cause, the beginning of the Second World War helped America get to its feet by providing not only millions of new jobs, but helping point the nation in the right direction. People were unified under a common cause, and that saved the economy.
But it just wouldn't be New York if things stayed quiet. In the late 60s, the crime rate in Manhattan began to rise. The age of the mafia was coming to an end, and ready to ascend were thugs and neighborhood street gangs. In the early 1980s, crime spiked to new heights with the recent crack epidemic. Violence, drug dealing, diseases, and pretty much all other bad things increased in the 1980s and early 90s.
However, coming to the rescue were politicians and prosecutors like Michael Bloomberg and Rudy Giuliani. But unbeknownst to Giuliani, he would soon have to deal with a much more serious form of crime.
On September 11, 2001, disaster struck New York. At 8:46 a.m. local time, a low-flying plane, hijacked by members of the terrorist faction Al-Qaeda, hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Just 17 minutes later, a second attack descended upon the South Tower. Brave firemen stormed the flaming buildings, trying to save as many people as possible. After burning for almost an hour, the South Tower collapsed, followed shortly by the North, leaving much of Manhattan covered with a thick layer of white ash and a general feeling of shock and horror. But once again, the city bounced back, though the victims of that cowardly attack will never be forgotten and their deaths forever commemorated.
The history of Manhattan has been surrounded by conflict and compromise, from when it was purchased from the Manhattan tribe and captured by the Duke of York, all the way to when France dedicated the Statue of Liberty to us, or the often violent disputes between various races and ethnicities. Were it not for the many conflicts and compromises throughout the history of New York, Gotham and the rest of the world would not be the same as it is today.